All sound good. Everybody's in good voice. Glad everybody's here today. We weren't blown off to Oz somewhere last night. Of course, we laugh and it's funny, but there are a lot of people that are suffering through this storm. So we want to make sure that we keep them in our prayers, because the storm's not over. It's just further east. So let's keep everybody in our prayers for that, all right? Welcome to everybody here in person, all you folks out there in the Zoom universe, and everybody who will be joining us later on Facebook or on YouTube. Always glad to see you. However, you manifest that presence, we are always glad. So let's get going today. Way back in 1970, most of us remember 1970, right? There was a musician, Gordon Lightfoot, wrote a song, If You Could Read My Mind. And the opening line of that song is, if you could read my mind, love, what a tale my thoughts could tell. That was a pretty song. I liked it anyway. It's a nice little ditty there, but I learned recently what the song was about, and it was actually written about the ending of Lightfoot's first marriage. And if you remember the song, there's this line down there somewhere that says, burned in a three-way script. And that could be seen as a reference to the reason for the ending of his marriage, and that is he had an affair, a 3-year affair, with another woman. Yeah, there's always drama in music, right? Yeah. And then there are those memes which occasionally make the rounds on Facebook about this, and it's really funny. There's first one, don't bother walking a mile in my shoes. That would be boring. Just spend 30 seconds in my head. That will freak you right out. Yeah. Or another one, as blunt as I may seem, I don't say half of what I'm thinking. Amen. And you're welcome. And the last one, I don't need a mood ring. I have a face. But, imagine this. Can you imagine everyone knowing what you're thinking all the time? Ooh, would that be interesting? And of course, there have been some movies made about this subject. And one I'm going to share about very briefly is very appropriately named Chaos Walking. And it was released in 2021. Now, I'm not going to share the whole movie, but the synopsis, the gist of the movie is, at one time there was this planet, and there was this huge war on the planet. All the women were killed, and only half of the men survived. And the ones who survived were afflicted with, I believe, what is appropriately called the noise. And the affliction of the noise was these guys could know each other's thoughts and see the imagery of thoughts in like a streaming video type of thing, right? So it was constant. That would be noise, right? And then one day, a spaceship crash lands on this planet, and the only survivor is a woman. And guess what? She doesn't have the noise. She can think for herself. Her thoughts are her own, and her thoughts can't be controlled, right? And of course, after the men learned that, some of them wanted to kill her. They wanted to capture her, because you can't have a woman thinking for herself, now can you? Yeah, try saying something like that in unity and see how far you get. Of course, we all know that people of all gender identities who can think for themselves have always been a threat to those in power. And that's because usually the people in power are most threatened, because people, if we can think for ourselves, if we have our own thoughts, we are less prone to being controlled. and to be manipulated. And for people in power or who want to keep power or who want to be in power, period, that's a big problem. So, today's question, what's on your mind? And does it really matter? That's the topic. Now, right off the bat, there seems to be a really large consensus that what we think does matter. What is in our mind does matter. Here are a few examples from the Bible. Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7. As a person thinks, so they are. From Buddhism, we are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. From Buddhist nun, Pema, I believe it is Chodron, the mind is the source of all suffering, and it is also the source of all happiness. From John Milton, the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. So again, I ask, what's on your mind? Are you in heaven or are you in hell? Now, these quotes and others like them are very much in alignment with Unity's third principle. And if you've been around Unity for any time, you probably remember it. But if you're kind of new to Unity or you're not sure, the third principle has different versions. But one of the more official, which means longer, versions is human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thinking. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in thought. Another way of saying this is a quote that Unity folks are familiar with, and that is, thoughts held in mind produce after their own kind. Now that's potentially great news, right? Because what it's telling us is our thoughts, our minds have the power to influence what shows up in our lives. And that's potentially good news. Here are a couple of quick examples of how that might work, for good or for ill. So how many of us here on any given day have awakened, start to get out of bed, we hear snap, crackle, pop, and our bodies say, oh no, sweetheart, not today. Nope. But then our bodies, let's say our bodies are cooperative. We're doing okay. We get up, we stretch, and then we make the mistake of turning on our news feed before we have our first cup of coffee. And we watch the news for a little bit. We say, oh, heck no, I am not going out there today. First instinct, go back to bed, take the covers, pull them up over your head. Eventually, however, most of us do get up and get at it, right? Because we have things to do. We have responsibilities. There are things for us to do. So think about it. If you start in that mindset, let's go with the body mindset. And you go out, one of your friends says, like, for example, well, Danny, how are you doing today? Every freaking bone in my body hurts. Getting old sucks. Or if you've watched the news before you've had your first cup of coffee, somebody would say, Scott, how you doing, man? How's your day going? And Scott says, oh, man, did you watch the news? The whole world is going to hell. And with all these crazy, tariffs and trade wars, I'm not even going to be able to afford the handbasket to get there. Now, we laugh, and of course, those thoughts are normal, right? It's normal. We feel what we feel. And in Unity, we encourage that. Don't deny what you feel. But just at the same time, remember, your mindset impacts your day. So when we get caught up in that negativity, we tend to miss all the great stuff going on around us. We miss the beauty of the sunshine. We miss the beauty of the rain and the breeze. Most of us will forget those blessings of food and shelter and the fact that we could get out of bed and go do what we need to do. Love, support of friends, community, family, whether your family's biological, a family of choice, or a combination of any of that. When we are so caught up in a negative mindset, we tend to overlook that. We forget that. So what this teaching is reminding us is, while we may not be able to do a whole lot about aching joints in economic policy, we do have the power to shift our thinking about these things. And that is some serious power. So how can we harness that power in positive ways? So glad you asked. So I'm going to use a few questions to help frame our discussion. And these questions, a couple of them come from Science of Mind author Ellen Castro. First question is a variation on the foundational one I asked earlier. What are you thinking about lately? Not just what's on your mind. What are you thinking about lately? And if you find yourself caught up in a cycle of negativity, guess what? You and only you can change that. Now, Castro says each thought has power and every thought counts. Reverend Ellen Davenport of Unity, who wrote the book, The 5 Principles of Unity, agrees with her. In fact, in her book, she says that everything that shows up in our life is because we've thought, some thought we've had, whether it's subconscious, unconscious, consciously, everything. So after I read Reverend Davenport and after I read Ellen Castro, I said, nope, I am not on that page. And here's why. For far too long, comments like that have been used by some people as a spiritual bypass. On the one hand, we've got folks who would say, well, all we have to do is think happy thoughts, and all the challenges that we're facing in life and in the world will just go away. Or sometimes when people are having a really tough time in their lives and they feel like their world is falling apart and they just need somebody to listen to, some folks will actually say to them, like, well, what have your thoughts been lately? What you're thinking, because our thoughts attract everything to us. So it's got to be something you've been thinking. And there are cases where that has happened. Not helpful. Not helpful at all. And folks, I don't know about you, but if every single thought I've ever had showed up in my life, I would be in a lot of trouble. In fact, I probably wouldn't even be here today if everything I've ever thought about manifested in my life. Now, yes, I will agree. Our mindset sometimes is a major contributor to what shows up in our lives. It does affect what shows up. The problem is, though, if we attribute every single thought we've ever had or are having to what shows up in our lives, it can lead to a kind of paranoia as we try to police every thought that comes into our minds. Again, remember the movie Chaos Walking. If we knew that everybody else knew what was in our minds, wouldn't that just freak you out? Oh my gosh, these people know what I'm thinking. I better change it. Oh my word. But then they know you're changing it. That just, So let's remember, this might help. Let's remember the quote, thoughts held in mind. Thoughts held in mind. So perhaps rather than asking, what am I thinking about lately, perhaps we could ask, what am I focusing on lately? Because, folks, we think all the time. Even in meditation, when they say, oh, make your mind a perfect blank, that is not happening. Okay? It's normal. So what are we focusing on lately? And then, again, if we find ourselves caught up in a bunch of negativity, we can start to change our thinking. As Castro says, every thought can be a turning point for choosing love and living fearlessly. I like that. Every thought can be a turning point for choosing love and living fearlessly. Or, as Louise Hay is quoted as saying, though I walk through the valley of death, I don't have to build a house there. Amen? Next question. What are you expecting from life? What are you expecting from life? Now, this is another place where I have some challenges with this teaching. And by now, y'all are probably thinking, man, you got a lot of challenges. But I do, and the reason is, again, like as I've said before, there are those who will say that all we have to do is change our thoughts and the world will change. In fact, that is a quote often attributed to Norman Vincent Peale. Heck, Wayne Dyer, and I love Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer even wrote a book about this, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And I love Wayne Dyer. And on one hand, I'm totally on board with that. Because, see, there's this thing we talk about in Unity New Thought called the collective consciousness, and of which each of us is a part. So, for example, if enough people think the whole world is going to hell anyway, with or without the handbasket, eventually, if enough people think that, we're going to make enough choices that we're going to make that happen. Somebody's going to push a button somewhere, and someone else is going to push a button in retaliation, and it'll happen. If the collective consciousness gets to a certain point. I believe that. So I also believe that we have the power, if enough people start shifting the collective consciousness in a more positive direction, and it takes all of us, because we're all part of it, if we start shifting that in a more positive direction, perhaps we can slowly start turning the Titanic away from the iceberg. And we can apply this same logic to our individual lives as well. So I'm on board with that. The challenge for me, though, is when folks think all we have to do, remember the all we have to do is think happy thoughts and it all magically goes away. Now, I'm not a grump. Really, I'm not. Most of the time, I'm not a grump. I love positive thinking. Nothing wrong with positive thinking. Nothing wrong with visioning and vision boards and all of those tools. Not a thing wrong with it. As a matter of fact, shameless plug, commercial plug, in June, we're going to be doing some visioning here. Mark your calendars. It's coming your way. Details to come. So there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all. But for me, these and other tools are starting points. They are starting points for creating the lives in the world we desire. So maybe we can change Castro's quote, every thought can be a turning point for choosing love and living fearlessly, to every thought can be a starting point for choosing love and living fearlessly. Now, if you've been coming to church here for any time at all or watching from home any time at all, you know what's coming next, right? We have this truth. We're learning these truths. And what's next? Unity's fifth principle, we do something about it. How do we put the teaching into practice? Let's start with checking our mindset. Castro calls it a thought audit. Now, personally, I wouldn't go that far because before I became a minister so many years ago, I was an accountant. I did auditing work, and that is a lot of detail. And for me, it could very easily lead us into that thought paranoia I mentioned earlier. Doing an audit, I can see me doing this. I can't speak for you. I can see me doing this with my mindset. Any of us that have perfectionist tendencies, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you have perfectionist tendencies and you do a thought audit, you know how this works, right? Oh my God. How many thoughts did I have today? Oh my gosh. How many negative thoughts did I have? How many negative thoughts are too many negative thoughts before I start impacting the world? Oh my gosh. Is it just one? I am so screwed. The whole world is going to go to hell in a handbasket because of me. And there's not going to be enough room in the handbasket for all of us to fit. So my suggestion, and it's a suggestion, my suggestion is not that extreme, but do be mindful. Be mindful of what's going on in those beautiful minds of ours. And when we find ourselves going down the negativity rabbit hole, as we all do sometimes, just stop. Just stop. Even if it's just a minute, just stop. And then ask ourselves, what is this trying to teach me? Where's the lesson? Whether I like the lesson or not. Where is the lesson? Try to allow everything and everyone to be your teacher. Because they can be. And you know what? Sometimes it is going to take a lot of time. Prayer, patience, and meditation to figure out the lesson. The point? Stay with it. Stay with it. Don't surrender to a negative individual consciousness or a negative collective consciousness. At times you may feel, like Louise Hay said, that we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Okay, feel what you feel. Don't set up house there. Okay, that's the point. And you know what's next? Once we learn the lesson, and we will if we stay with it, once we learn the lesson and we see maybe one thing that we can do to make that needed positive shift toward our best and our highest selves, one thing, hear the word, one thing that we can do to shift the collective consciousness, do it over and over and over until it becomes just a normal part of our lives. And then we keep doing that until the next lesson comes along, because they don't stop, y'all. This is not a one and done. The next lesson comes, do it again until the next step is revealed to us. One step at a time, one thought at a time, and as our friends in recovery remind us, one day at a time. Can we do it? Well, yeah, we can do it eventually. Now, how do I know this? Because we have the promise of Scripture from the book of Philippians that we can indeed do all that is ours to do through the power of the Christ light and the Christ presence, which is within each and every one of us. So yeah, eventually, we got this. So, what's on your mind now? It matters, you know. And so it is.